Vanity. It's all vanity, chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. This too is chasing the wind. Instead of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? Vanity. It's all vanity.
I knew this kid once who, he grew up very sheltered, you know? He grew up in the church, he grew up religious, and he grew up with parents who were kind of always knowing what he was doing, what he was going through. And so what that did is that meant that he didn't experience a lot of the world or some of the chaos that can happen in life. And they did a really good job of sheltering him from the brokenness of the world until things started to kind of break through and break down this facade that the world wasn't the way he had thought it was. It wasn't as safe or as clean or as easy as he thought it was. And he remembers that at the age of 10, when his brother, who used to lead worship at his church, was weeping as he sat in the middle of a mess because someone had broken into the church, stole all the music equipment in the church, and the locks were off, and the alarm was going off, and there was this 15-year-old brother just weeping over this brokenness. And then again, this kid tells this story about when he was 15, and he began to see his dad, who was in ministry, not live consistently with what he was preaching. That there was certain things in his life that he would say, but then when he'd get up on the pulpit and preach it, he just wouldn't do it. It wasn't the same. And then probably all hell broke loose for this kid when he was 21. His best friend died. And there was just this moment where he began to realize that maybe the world wasn't as safe, as clean, as easy as he had thought it was. Maybe there was real brokenness in this world. And yes, his family had sheltered him, but they couldn't stop every bad thing from coming into his life. And what had happened is, because he had been so sheltered through religion and through following Jesus, he was a Christian actually, because he had experienced this, something that happened inside of him. He began to look down on others who were weak or struggling. So if someone was having a hard time, he'd look at them and he'd have a judgmental posture towards them and think, why are you so weak? Why can't you just fix yourself? And maybe not everyone he looked at that way. Others who maybe they just had a harder life than him, he'd look at them with pity and think, man, I wish you had the life I have, because then you wouldn't be experiencing what you're experiencing. But either way, he still thought he was better than people in some ways, and he used religion to prop himself up. And that was all fine and good until it hit the fan and things started to fall apart, and this little facade of safety wasn't enough anymore. I know that kid's story really well because that's my story. For so many years in my life, growing up in a Christian home, I was sheltered from so many negative experiences that it wasn't really until college where it all started to kind of fall apart for me, where I started to think, wait a minute, there is a broken world out there, and that brokenness is not just out there, but it's in here. And having to navigate the sin in my own life, the evil in my own heart, and having to navigate the brokenness in my own family and in my own life and in the ministry that I was a part of and that I saw was almost too much for me at some points. It was a really testing time for my faith. And I used religion to shelter myself from the brokenness, but it wasn't enough. Let me tell you about another story about another kid. There was this girl that I knew who, she knew that the world was broken. She had grown up completely around brokenness much of her life. Her father would sometimes bully her and be mean to her. And the only time he was especially affectionate or for her was when he was really drunk. And when he was drunk, he would be really nice and kind and say doting words on her. But that made her feel really unstable in her life. And then when she was in 8th grade, some friends betrayed her. They turned their back on her and they made her feel left out. And it was a devastating moment for her. And she had kind of had this happy disposition, but it began to kind of crumble under the weight of things that were happening in her life. And then when she was in 9th grade, at such a fragile, young, important age, her brother was killed. And at this moment, it was a gut punch for her because she realized you can live your whole life a certain way, and then that's it, it's over. And so she had kind of always not been sheltered from brokenness in her own family life, and that led her to this point where she could say, you know what, if you can live your whole life a certain way and then that could just be it, what's the point? And so without a way to navigate this brokenness, she began to live a very destructive, self-destructive, sabotaging kind of life. Very hopeless kind of life, right? And she tried to navigate her pain because she didn't know how else to do it. So she would numb herself through partying or through relationships or through whatever she can do to comfort herself from the fact that the world is very broken. And she used rebellion to try to numb herself from the brokenness of this world. But it wasn't a better coping mechanism. And it wasn't until she met Jesus in college where she began to see all the fragmented ways she was trying to deal with the brokenness of this world. I know that person really well because that's my wife. And what's crazy is Jesus is like, yeah, you two should go together. It's good, right? Like you got her and me, very different backgrounds. Me using religion and sheltered experience, and her using rebellion and the brokenness of her home life. And it kind of brought us together in this way. And through our relationship, he's kind of taught us both that neither of us really deals well all the time with the messiness of this life. And so I don't know where you're coming in from, what your background is, right? I'm not really sure where you're coming in this Sunday morning, but if you grew raised in the church or raised believing in right and wrong and doing the good thing, and you've kind of always been in church, you can begin to think that you are exempt from experiencing brokenness. And when you begin to believe that, you begin to believe that you have more control over your life than you actually do. And yet others of you, you know that their life is meaningless in some ways. You know there's a vanity to life. You know that this is all you got. And so you're kind of living it up, trying to find any joy and pleasure you can to fill yourself up. But you know what? When you're really being honest in those moments where clarity breaks through, you know it's not enough. And so Ecclesiastes is this book that says, listen, whichever way you're trying to cope with the brokenness of this world, look straight at me. Ecclesiastes says it's not enough. You can't shelter yourself well enough from the world that is broken. You can't numb yourself deep enough for the pain in this world. So stop sheltering and numbing yourself because the brokenness is always going to break through. Right? And so we do this weird thing in our head, though. Like in the church, we do it all the time where we think, man, I know I feel that, but I don't think other people feel that. And so one of the best ways that I see this breaking down is when you get into a life group. This is why community groups are so important. We have 3 of them that meet throughout the week. And if you're not in one, I would encourage you to be a part of one. Because what happens in these groups is as you share life with one another, you begin to realize, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. Like just a couple of weeks ago, I heard someone say, I had no idea that person would have struggled with that. Never in a million years would I have guessed that person is in that place. Because they seem so put together, right? And we're talking about, I've had groups of people who are, black and white and Mexican and people who come from money and people who are broke. I have people who have come from drug addictions and people who were raised, Christian their whole lives. And all of these different people come from different backgrounds, bringing their story and saying, yeah, I experienced brokenness. I experienced depravity. I experienced sin. I struggle. And there's some power that comes out when we confess in community that life is messy. Right? Life is messy. Life is dark sometimes. And Ecclesiastes is a book that is an invitation to stop pretending like it's not. Stop acting like life isn't broken, like you're not experiencing that. It's an invitation to come out into the light and say, yeah, there's parts of my own heart and my own life and my own family and my own story that are not clean, that are not easy, that are not just, perfect. Life is broken. And so sometimes we get to this point where we're like, all right, Pastor, I agree with you. Life is broken. I understand that. But maybe if I just could fix this one thing. So we get into this mentality that life is broken. All we need to do is tweak. We just tweak this one little thing, then things would be fine. If I could just fix this one little issue, then everything would be good. And so there's different variations of this, but they all amount to the same. We say, man, if I could just study the Bible, if I could just get more information in my head, I wouldn't have to feel the pain in my marriage. Or we say things like, man, if I could just get my prayer life is so broken. If I could just pray more, maybe I wouldn't feel so angry all the time. Or we say things like, maybe if we're being honest, if I had more money, if my boss would just give me a promotion, right? Or if I had a better sex life, more fulfilling sex life, that would be good. And then I could finally be happy, be free. Some of you are like, man, if I could just improve my wife or improve my husband, then I would finally experience fulfillment. Some of you are like, if I could finally get rid of my wife, get rid of my husband, all right? Y'all coming from different levels, all right? I know, all right? But here's what you're thinking. You're thinking that salvation and rescue is just out of your reach, and you're playing this game in your head saying, if only I had this, then things would be all right. And so this mindset says that my problem is something that's just out of my reach. And all I need to do is reach a little harder, a little more, and then I'll finally be put together, right? And so Ecclesiastes says this. It says, what if our problem is so much deeper than that? Like, what if the problem is so much worse, and guess what? There's no fix to it. Ecclesiastes looks you straight in the eyes and says, I don't think so. I don't think it's just outside of your reach. I don't think more money, more sex, more pleasure, more career, more family time, I don't think that's going to actually fulfill you the way that you think that's going to fulfill you. All the time I deal with this. People who are single saying, I want to get married. People married who want to be single. People who have kids, can't have kids, want to have kids. People who have kids don't want to have. Everyone thinks like, or a big one when I was a youth pastor was, everyone said, once I leave this valley, this valley is just so deadening and so dark. Once I get out of here, then I'll start to live. And I'm like, no, I came from out there. It ain't good out there, all right? You know what I'm saying? There ain't nothing out there, right? But no, I need to figure that out for myself, and that's fine. They go on this journey, and they realize that the problem isn't out there, it's in here. So wherever you go, you are with yourself. And so Ecclesiastes says, what if there's a problem that you are trying to fix, and it actually can't be fixed? Look what he says in verse 14. The way he describes it is the title for our series. Look what he says in Ecclesiastes 1:14. He says, I've seen everything that's been done under the sun, and behold, all of it is vanity. Look what he says. It is a striving after the wind. Or maybe that Hebrew word could be translated, chasing the wind. The idea is this. You're trying to herd wind. You know what I'm saying? The wind is coming and you're trying to find a way to grasp it, to control it, to manipulate it. How foolish would it be if you saw someone running around the parking lot in Gateway Church trying to herd the wind, chase the wind? You'd say that's a foolish, futile thing. You're never going to get the wind to go where you want. You can't do that. That's above your pay grade, right? And so he says, trying to fix your life is like chasing wind. It's an empty, futile thing to try. Chasing the wind. And like again, the word in Hebrew is herding, right? Like it's trying to herd cats. We have that, you guys ever heard that? Herding cats. Cats are the worst. Cats are a part of the fall, I'm convinced, all right? If your friend has a dog gets hit by a car, a good friend goes, picks up that dog, takes it to the vet. If a cat gets hit by a car, a good friend helps dig the ditch. You know what I'm saying? That's how I feel about cats, all right? I'm not a cat person, all right? Amen? Some of you are like, man, you are dark today, Pastor. You didn't have your coffee or what? I'm just saying, man, like I hate cats, right? But one of the worst things about cats is you can't control them. You can't tell them where to go. They do what they want. And trying to herd the wind is kind of like that experience of it's impossible. And so again and again throughout Ecclesiastes, the preacher is going to look at us and say, man, you're chasing wind. You're chasing the wind. And so he's going to say, would you just stop? Would you just admit that maybe life is more broken than you're willing to admit? Look what he says in the very next verse of chapter 1, verse 15. He says, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. Here's what he's saying. He's saying there is a certain brokenness. You just can't bend back into straightness. What is lacking inside of you cannot be counted because it's eternal. What is missing inside of you, he says later on, eternity has been put in man's heart. In other words, there's something inside of you that is so misfiring that a little bit of tweaking here and a little bit of tweaking there is never going to quite fulfill you the way that you think and believe. Right? It's kind of like trying to stay clean when you have a toddler. You guys know what I'm talking about? Okay, the other day my wife was just so frustrated because she looked at me and she's in total despair. She's like, I can never be clean. I can never be clean. Every time I try to be clean, Olive just throws something else on me. And she has all this stuff on her. And so I'm living there, listening compassionately. And it's almost like Olive knew what she was saying. Olive looks right at her and goes, right? And sneezes her cookie snot onto Emily's neck area and on her, and I thought it was funny. She didn't think it was funny. I was like, good one, Olive. No, my wife's like, right, trying to live in this world and not experience brokenness is like trying to stay clean with a toddler. It's impossible. It's impossible. You can't do it. And that's what he's saying. And so maybe at this point, some of you are like, okay, who is this guy? Who does this guy think he is? Who do you think you are, Pastor, to say that my life is broken and it's broken to the point where it cannot be fixed on my own? Who do you think you are to tell me that my life is crooked and it cannot be straightened out in my own strength? Who is this guy? Who is this preacher who keeps on saying these bold claims? He doesn't know me. Well, that's a good question. Look at verse 1 of chapter 1. These are the words of the preacher, the son of David, who was king in Jerusalem. And so we don't really know who wrote this book. Okay, we don't really know. A lot of people think it was King Solomon. And they think it was King Solomon who wrote this book because he was the king who was the son of David immediately after, right? But the word right there in Hebrew for preacher is kohelet, and what it means is he's one who teaches in an assembly, right? So whoever this guy is, he's important. He's up in front. He's speaking in front of people. He's a teacher, and he's called the son of David. We don't really know exactly if it's Solomon or another son of David because David had other sons. Some people, again, think it is Solomon. That's historically what people thought. But let me give you some reasons why I'm actually not sure it's Solomon. Look at verse 16 of chapter 1. Look what he says. He says, I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom. I've surpassed all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Now look what he says. He says, I have more wisdom than everyone who came before me. Now if this is Solomon, there's only one person that's been before him. That was his dad, David. So I don't know why he would say all the people who were before me if he only has one person before him, okay? And later on, he talks about how the government is oppressive. In chapter 4, verse 4, he talks about government oppression. If he's the king, why would he talk that way, right? Later on in chapter 8, he talking about how kings specifically are oppressive. In chapter 4 and in chapter 10, he talks about the stupidity of government bureaucracy. Again, if this is Solomon, it doesn't make a ton of sense if he's the only king who he's ever known in his lifetime, right? And then he keeps on doing this weird thing. Like maybe you've noticed it. In verse 1, it says, these are the words of the preacher. Vanity, vanity, says the preacher. He's talking in the third person. But then in verse 11 and 12, he starts talking in the first person. I, the preacher. So it's kind of weird because people don't normally talk in the third person. Like Joe doesn't normally talk in the third person, right? Unless Joe's trying to make a funny joke to Gateway. You know what I'm saying? Like Joe doesn't normally do that, right? Like, see what I'm saying? I don't talk like that about myself. And so it would seem weird that the author is talking about himself in the third person. So I don't know that it's Solomon. What I actually think is happening is this. I think that probably what is happening is these are the words of someone who's attempting like a thought project. He's saying, think with me for a bit. Let's put ourselves in Solomon's shoes. He's going to describe the life of Solomon. He's not trying to trick you. He's not trying to make up a story so that you think it's Solomon. I think he's just trying to teach you something. It's kind of like, you guys ever seen that movie Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer? I don't, all right? That's why I still have brain cells. I didn't see it, all right? I'm just kidding. I don't know if you saw it. But listen, it's called Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, okay? Now, who is going to watch that movie and say, that is inaccurate? Abraham Lincoln never slayed any vampires, right? No, because you know that the movie is ultimately for entertainment purposes. You know it's not trying to be, it's just trying to teach you something about, for fun, right? In the same way, I think this book is a thought project. And I think the guy who wrote this book is saying, hey, let's think about what you think. You think that you can just fix your life a little? He says, no. Let's pretend we were Solomon for a second. Let's put ourselves in Solomon's shoes. Now, Solomon was richer. He was wiser. He had a ton of women that he could sleep with. It's true. Solomon had career success. He had a legacy that would blow yours out of the water. We're talking about the smarts of Steve Jobs, the money of Bill Gates, right? Like the wisdom of Dr. Phil. I don't know. Maybe he's not wise. Whatever. We're talking about this he has it all. You know what I'm saying? He has it all. And so he says, let's see what Solomon would say about thinking that you can be fulfilled in this life. If anyone could speak to self-fulfillment in this life, it would be a man who has it all. And so speaking from this Solomon perspective, here's what he says. When he looks at life and says, man, based on everything I have, what can I say about this world? Look what he says in verse 2. Vanity. Vanity, says the preacher. It's all vanity. Dark. Right? Here's what Solomon is saying. He's saying, listen, I've had it all. I'm smarter. I've done more. And my assessment is it's all vain. And so here's what this series is going to be. Okay? Let me just tip you off and tell you at the front end. For the next 8 weeks, we're going to study this book in Ecclesiastes. And what we're going to do is we're going to deconstruct the idea. We're going to tear down this fake idea that salvation is something inside of you. that you can rescue yourself, that what you're experiencing, the brokenness that you're experiencing in your life is something that you can manipulate and control and find a way to find salvation in yourself. Because that's what the world is preaching to you. It's saying that you just need a little more believe in yourself, trust in yourself, speak confident words to yourself. If you do that enough, you will finally get to the point where you'll pull your life together. And Ecclesiastes is going to say, I don't believe it, man. Bull, I don't believe it, man. He's going to say, no, it's actually vain. And if anyone could say it's vain, it's me. And so it's going to be a dark series, man. Get buckled up because it's going to be a messy series where he begins to invite us into being honest about the brokenness of the world, of this world. And so here's what I want to do first. He talks in verse 2 about this word vanity. And this really is the key to the whole series, vanity. And the word in Hebrew is Hevel, right? And so it's used 38 times. In the rest of the book of Ecclesiastes, 38 times you'll see this word. Hevel, everything is Hevel he talks about. And so in your translation, it says the word vanity. Maybe some of your translations say the word meaningless. But this word Hevel, it's this all-purpose use metaphor. Okay, first of all, it's onomatopoeia. I know it's like a fancy word, but you know like the word zip, it does what it says. Zip, no one's with me. You guys aren't. Or snap, right? It kind of sounds like what it's accomplishing. That's kind of what the word Hebel was in Hebrew. Hevel. It was just like this puff. It was kind of like this wind. It's hard to understand. Hebel. And it kind of created this, like this wind sound, right? And that's exactly what the word Hevel means in Hebrew. It means vapor or mist or fog or wind. It's kind of this like this hard to discern, hard to grasp concept. And so it's this idea, Hevel is this idea of what we might say a mist. And so I got a couple of pictures that I want you to see because some of you guys process in this way. And so what I did is I got a couple pictures. First is when you think of Hevel, when you think of this Hebrew word, what I want you to think is mist. And here's the thing about mist. It's here, and then it's gone. There's 3 generations of your family. All right? You know what I'm saying? Gone. There's another, just for laughing. All right? I'm just kidding. All right? It's gone. There's your life. So when from God's perspective, when he sees your life, he's not seeing days and years. And God says, no, your life to me and to the wise preacher is here, and then it's gone. It's fleeting. And so this word in Hebrew is used constantly this way, right? And we talk this way, right? Talk to an old man who's retired and sitting there on the ranch. He'll say, son, let me tell you something. Don't blink because life goes fast. Here's what he's saying. It's gone. And we don't feel that, but then all of a sudden you wake up one day, you're 28, and you just realize you injured yourself because you're reaching for the loofah too hard. And you're like, oh, Hevel, right? Like, how did life get, like, what happened? Like, I used to get real injuries in basketball, and now I'm, reaching for the loofah too hard, right? What happened? And you wake up again, you have grandkids, you're like, what the, what's going on? And the Bible would say that's called Hevel. It's fleeting, it's gone, it's a mist. Right? And so the Bible speaks of Hevel this way constantly. In Psalm 39:5, you don't have to turn there, but listen, it says this, you have made my days like a mere handbreadth. The span of my years is nothing before you. Every man's life is but a Hevel. In other words, every man's life is but a breath. It's but a mist. Here and then gone. Psalm 144 says it like this, man is like a Hevel. He's like a breath. His days are fleeting like a shadow. So the concept that he's trying to get is that life is here and then it's not, right? Or maybe this is a better image for you. Maybe for you, you need to see it more like this because the mist kind of lasts long, like bubbles, right? So like a bubble's here, and what happens? There is human history. It's gone. Oh, it's not gone. Judgment Day, all right? It's a bubble, pop, gone. You know what I'm saying? That's the image he's trying to create. It's something small, insignificant, fleeting, all right? And so he says this in Proverbs 31:30. He says, charm is deceptive and beauty is Hevel. Beauty's fleeting, right? A woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Some of you are like, man, my beauty ain't fleeting. Listen, you're like a man who was born rich and you're losing money every day. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just true. That's not true for one. It's just true for all of us, all right? Some of us were born ugly, so feel sorry for us, okay? But listen, the Bible says if you're beautiful, guess what? You have a lot in your bank account, and each day you're seeing that number go down, right? Beauty is fleeting, okay? It's here. And our culture, we're trying to find ways to keep ourselves young. We have, all these surgeries and, Botox. And guess what? No matter what you do to hold it up, it's coming down. You know what I'm saying? Right? Amen? I ain't judging. All right? I ain't judging. I'm just being real. Okay? Hevel. You know what I'm saying? And so Ecclesiastes 11:10 says it this way. Why don't you remove your anxiety, your vexation from your heart? Put away the pain from your body. Your youth and the dawn of life are Hevel. In other words, man, you're only young for a minute. And then it's crazy because you talk to your 5-year-old and he wants to be 8, and you talk to your 8-year-old and he can't wait till he's a teenager. You talk to your teen, he can't wait till he gets his license. And then the rest of us adults want to go back, right? And man, I wish I was young again. I wish I was back there, right? And so youth is fleeting, it says. It's here and then it's not. This is the way, again, that the Bible is going to describe life. It's fleeting, okay? James 4:4 says, we're a mist that appears and then vanishes. And so, again, the description of the Bible is like a mist that just vanishes. That's Hevel right there. And that's the key to this book, is understanding that life is fleeting. But here's the second part of the definition that's super important and a lot of times misunderstood. Hevel doesn't only mean that life is fleeting. It also means life is kind of like a puzzle. And so the description is, not only is it like a mist that's here and then it's gone, but it's also like a fog. And so I don't know why, but for some reason we have a fog machine at Gateway. Isn't that weird? All right, that's so weird. And I'm like, I got to figure out a way to use this, man. So here it is, Hevel. You know what I'm saying? But here's the thing about Hevel, right? It's here, but it's not something you can really grasp. Like, it's not here. You know what I'm saying? And so the idea of chasing the wind is you're chasing this, and then what happens? What happens is you get to this point where you're trying to grab at life, but it's not something that you can grab at until you become exhausted. You become frustrated. And the Bible would say this here is Hevel. Now, one of the things you experience as you're looking up on stage with all this Hevel is that you're noticing that now maybe it's harder to see me. It's harder to see the background. There's kind of this mist thing going on, right? We're like in a rock concert now. And so the Bible says that's exactly what happens with smoke. Is now what was so clear, my face was so clear before, now it's kind of hard to discern. It's hard to see. It's hard to because that's what life is. It's kind of this enigma. It's this puzzle, okay? And so one of the key ways, that you can't even see me right now, right? I might just disappear like a magician, all right? One of the key ways that Ecclesiastes wants to describe life to us as Hevel is like this. It's a fog. It creates lack of clarity. It creates a sort of, you can't really see. It's a paradox. And so the Bible's going to describe it, Hevel, as this. And so in Ecclesiastes chapter 8, verse 14, here's what the preacher tells us. There is a Hevel that takes place on earth. There are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. This is Hevel. So here's what he's saying. He's saying life is this fog where it just makes things unclear. You can't really see anymore. It's this thing that, yes, it's fleeting, but more importantly, it's a puzzle that you can't really even understand. He says life creates this paradox where now things are hard to see, right? And one of the ways he describes in chapter 8 is, why do righteous people get punished like they're wicked, and why do wicked people keep getting away with the wrong that they're doing? Why does it seem in life that the wicked people are thriving? Like, why is it that the terrorists right now are alive and thriving, but there are innocent kids in Africa who are starving? That doesn't seem fair. And the Bible would say that's Hevel. Hard to understand. Because we all have this sense of justice, of right and wrong, and yet when we're trying to grab at justice, it doesn't seem like life agrees with us. Or why is it that there are dying missionaries who are giving their life to translate the scriptures, and yet in Mexicali there's drug cartel guys who are thriving and having the time of their life? That doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem equitable. The Bible would say you're grasping and trying to understand something that is foggy. Okay? Or you might say, why is it that the greedy, power-hungry politicians keep moving up, getting elected, and put in positions of prominence, and the mom and pop shop down the road, they can't even seem to get ahead? It seems like they're shutting their doors. They're about to shut their doors every month, and they're such good people. And the Bible would say, because life is Hevel. It doesn't make sense sometimes. You cannot grasp its meaning. It is this enigma. It is this puzzle. And guess what? We don't like life that is Hevel. We don't like a life that is here and then gone. We don't like a life that is foggy, that's hard to grasp at. No, we want things to be clear. And so Ecclesiastes is going to be this invitation for us to sit in this messy reality where things aren't clear, where life isn't forever, right? And so Ecclesiastes is an important book for us to hear because it's part of what's called the wisdom literature in the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, God gave us 3 books. He knew we were foolish, so he gave us 3, all right? And he said, read these books if you want to be wise. If you want to know what it's like to live a good life, read these 3 books. And the 3 books are the book of Job, the book of Proverbs, and the book of Ecclesiastes. And each of these 3 books is going to give you a different angle on what it means to be wise in this life. Now, wisdom literature is different than other books of the Bible. Like if you're reading Paul, it's like an argument, right? If you're reading Genesis, it's a story. The Gospel of John is the story of Jesus, right? So now we're in a genre that's different. And part of the thing that makes it different is Ecclesiastes likes to talk in paradoxes. Things that seem like contradictions, but they just appear that way and they're actually not. Or he'll talk in riddles. Riddle me this. You're like, okay, just tell me straight. You know what I'm saying? Like, but that's how he talks. Or he'll say puzzles, or he'll ask questions, or use metaphors, or exaggerate, right? So part of the reason why Gateway is really committed to teaching the scriptures. So each week we open up a piece of the Bible and we just teach through it verse by verse, section by section. But one of the things that I had to decide is, how am I going to teach a book that's a wisdom literature book that isn't really a linear book that you can kind of study like an argument? There is an argument in Ecclesiastes, but it's more thematic. So what we're going to do for the next 8 weeks is not teach verse by verse, but theme by theme. And my goal in this is I want to be biblical, but what I want to do is I want to give you glasses to understand the argument that he is making by approaching themes that he talks about. So like next week, we're going to talk about time. We're going to talk about death. And we're going to talk about, trying to escape these realities. We're going to talk about all these different themes. And the reason why is because this is wisdom literature, which means it's not really this linear thing you can kind of follow. It repeats itself. It's cyclical. And that's because he's this sage. He's trying to give us wisdom for life. And so he's one of 3, though, right? So what I want you to imagine in your mind is I want you to imagine there's these 3 people who are all kind of wise, and they're trying to teach you about life. And so they go out to have coffee. And as they're sitting there for coffee, there's the book of Proverbs. And I want you to think of this young school teacher. All right, this young gal who just got out of school, and she's a primary age school teacher, so she's very optimistic about life. And she has a lot of wisdom for her age. But because she just got out of school, she's a little too optimistic. You know what I'm saying? She thinks she's going to change the world by teaching ABCs, But she has some good things to say, so we're going to listen to her. And then we have this guy who's Job. And if you know anything about the book of Job, Job was put through the ringer. His whole family died in one day. He lost all of his business in one day, and he didn't do a single thing to deserve it. He was being tempted directly by Satan himself. And Job's life is a mess. So Job is this old, tattered man who's kind of gone through cancer. He's kind of experienced the depths of pain, divorce, and death. And he's seen it all. And Job's wisdom is this lived experience of suffering. And so Job's going to sit down and have coffee, and he's going to say, man, life is hard. And then we have the book of Ecclesiastes, the preacher. This Solomon-like figure who's going to sit down and have coffee, but he's not only going to have coffee, he's also going to have a pipe. Hevel, right? He's going to sit down and have coffee, and he's kind of this middle-aged man who's a little cynical, who's a little realistic, but he's always going to bring you down. So Proverbs is going to talk in terms of the rule. Here are the rules to life. And Ecclesiastes is going to say, yeah, but not always. And then Job's going to say, man, I don't even know how I'm still alive, right? Like that's each of their points of trying to give you wisdom as they sit at this table and have this conversation. And so I'll show you what I mean. Up on the screen, there's these 3 verses, or we'll have actually one at a time. The first is from Proverbs 13, chapter 9. So this is the young school teacher, is very optimistic, and here's what she says. She says, the light of the righteous rejoice, but the lamp of the wicked will be snuffed out. So here's this young school teacher, and she's like, you know what I found out to be true in grad school? Tell us. And she's like, if you do good things, life is good. Bad people get punished. Boom, their light goes out. And you're like, okay. And then we have this next verse, which is from Job. And look what Job does. Job is the old man who didn't do anything wrong. He's seen a lot of bad people get promoted and a lot of good people get demoted. Job says, how often is the lamp of the wicked put out? Wait. Every time? I don't know. I don't buy it. He says, that their calamity comes upon them, that God distributes pain in his anger towards them. He says, how often does justice actually work its way out? Because it didn't make its way out in my life. In fact, in the book of Job, what you see is 3 of his friends coming up to him saying, what did you do wrong? What did you do wrong to deserve this life, Job? You've been suffering. You must have done something wrong. And Job's like, I swear I didn't do anything. And he's telling the truth. He's like, I've done everything right. And so what's wrong with Job's 3 friends is they've only read the book of Proverbs. They're like, wait a minute, I've been reading the book of Proverbs, and it says if you do good things will come to you. And because I've only read the book of Proverbs, I'm going to wound you with the word of God. Because I don't have enough wisdom to know that maybe there's more to reality than just what I can see in this one sliver, this one little book, this one little verse. And so they're so narrow in the way that they're approaching wisdom is they have no space for a man who suffers and did nothing wrong. See, we do this sometimes. We wound people with the word of God because all we're doing is looking at this one verse or this one book or this one chapter, not realizing there's a lot more to be said about life. So Job says, no, man, I'm telling you, I did nothing wrong. Are you sure that the righteous always get what's coming to them and that the wicked always get what's coming to them? Because that's not been true in my life. And then Ecclesiastes, smoking his pipe, blows smoke out, says, it's all Hevel, man. It's all Hevel, right? And look what he says in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 15. He says, no, I've seen a righteous man. I know this righteous guy who perishes despite his righteousness. And I've seen this wicked man who has this long life despite his wickedness. This too is Hevel. Right? He's blowing smoke into this idea, this ABC teacher's trying to say that life always works out a certain way. And guess what? She's not lying either. She's not wrong. When she says if you do good, good will come to you, that's generally true. Like if you work hard, if you study, if you're kind to people, generally speaking, that is a good way to live. And if you live that way, it will produce good results for you. That is wisdom. Okay, so I'm not egging on Proverbs. I'm just simply saying maybe we have to invite Ecclesiastes and Job into the discussion so we stop wounding people with truth that wasn't meant to be used that way. And so we do this a lot in the church. Right? But Ecclesiastes, man, I know a righteous guy who died and he didn't deserve to die. And this is just true. Like my mom, one of the things she would weep about, being in ministry, you have a lot of things that you weep about. But one of the things that really broke her over was when she was 20 years old, just, bright-eyed and going into ministry. One of her best friends, it was my dad and my mom's best friends. They were going into ministry. They were going up north in California to plant a church. Right? Good people, godly people, committed to the gospel, solid people, you know what I'm saying? The kind of people you want in your life. And yet on their way to go start this church, they got in an accident on the freeway, a 20-car pileup, and they died like that. And you know what? Fidel Castro lived to the age of 90. Right? He lived to the age of 90. How do you make sense of that if you're reading only the book of Proverbs? See, Proverbs are not promises. They're just general principles that help you live your life. Too many of us use the Proverbs like they're rules for life, that if you do this, then this will happen. We use it like a math equation, and that's not the point of Proverbs, right? And so like here's another one that I see as a pastor happen all the time. Train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. So a lot of parents beat themselves up. They say, man, I trained up my child. He didn't go the way. He's left the faith. Did I fail, or did you fail, God? And so I see moms who are crushing themselves thinking, how do I make sure I train up my child so that they don't leave once they get to college and go to a secular school? How can I make sure that my kid stays in the faith? And here's Ecclesiastes' answers. It's all Hevel. You can't control that. Now, Proverbs will say, train them up, and they'll go that way. And that's true most of the time. But there are moments when we got to realize that sometimes that's not the way life works. And it doesn't mean, listen to me, parents, it does not mean that you're not a good parent. It doesn't mean that you failed. You hear what I'm saying? Because so many of us crush ourselves. Or else, if we don't crush ourselves, we look at God and raise our fists and say, you didn't keep your end of the deal. You said this is what would come about. And where is it, God? And so you get angry and you raise your fist towards a God, and God would look back at you and say, maybe I didn't fail you. Maybe it was your false expectations. I mean, think about this, church. Let me invite you just to consider this. If you think the good guy always wins, perhaps you've forgotten the gospel. Because the gospel, the central story of our faith, is about a good guy who loses. No, the perfect guy who loses. And it's about wicked people like us who win. So the gospel wisdom is not one that says good people get what's coming to them. The gospel wisdom is bad people get what's coming to Jesus, the ultimate good one. See what I'm saying? So sometimes we expect life to be a certain way, and then it doesn't happen, and that's why we need the book of Ecclesiastes, so we can be set free from thinking that life is this math equation, that if I only did this, then life would be this way. And so Ecclesiastes is going to invite us, this book, this series, is going to invite us to listen to a very unique voice. It's going to speak to our brokenness. He's going to not talk about what ought to be. He's going to talk about what actually is. He's going to talk about not the rules, but the exceptions to the rule. He's going to be honest to his experience, and it's going to resonate with this broken reality. He's going to be messy and dark. And the reason we need to be able to navigate in these places as a church is because our world is this way. You lose your witness when you don't speak the language of a world that is broken. You see what I'm saying? If we can't talk into suicide and shootings and abortion and depression and anxiety and the sex slave trade and lust and anger and bitterness, if we can't sit in that and deal and empathize and understand that because we're so Christian, we've lost the wisdom of the sage of Ecclesiastes. See what I'm saying? Because Ecclesiastes is an invitation to sit in that. And so here's what's happening in the church right now. Some of you, okay, you're glass half full kind of people, okay? And so you're like, man, this is awful. I'm not going to be at church for the next 2 months, all right? And you don't like it because you like clarity. And you like to know just what can I do to produce this result. This is good for you because you're going to need to be stretched in ways that your faith needs to be stretched. And it'll help you to empathize with the world that is broken, okay? It'll help your witness. Now, others of you, you're kind of dark. I like you, all right? My wife is dark, okay? So you guys can resonate, okay? Like you're kind of like sitting in this place where you're like, you know what? Life is messy, though. And so this series is going to be a breath of fresh air because you're going to say, finally, I feel understood. I don't feel like I need to fit into this neat Christian box because you're right, life is broken. And so Ecclesiastes is basically 99% tension. So it's like turning it up. Now we're going to get to the end, and the end is going to be a release. So you got to stay, okay? Stay for the whole series because the end is this beautiful release of, okay, that makes sense. But through the journey, it's this difficult point where you're trying to understand life in a broken world. Why is life broken? Look at verse 3 of Ecclesiastes 1. He answers, he says, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? He says, he talks about being under the sun, right? This phrase that he constantly keeps using. That's the third phrase that's really important. So Hevel is important. Actually, it's the second phrase. And then under the sun, super important, okay? So he's going to describe this phrase, under the sun, 30 times. So basically, you want to know the big idea of Ecclesiastes? Life under the sun is Hevel. Life under the sun is Hevel. That's the whole point of this book, okay? But what does he mean by life under the sun? If you want to know, turn your Bible to Genesis 3. Genesis chapter 3. Open your Bible and turn it there. We don't have it on the screen, so you actually have to do a little bit of work here for me. If not, you can just listen to me read it. This phrase, under the sun, or life on earth, what it essentially means is life in a broken world. So in Genesis chapter 1:9, when God creates the heavens and the earth, he created it good. So if you don't know the story of the Bible, here's what it is. When God made the world, he made it good, he made it perfect. It was all harmonizing. Everything was united and together, okay? Genesis chapter 1:9. But what happens in Genesis chapter 3 is we realize that when man rebels against God, when man says no to God, everything breaks apart. So I'm going to read you Genesis chapter 3, verse 6. The woman sees that the tree is good for food, that it was a delight to her eyes, that the tree was to be desired to make her wise. She takes the fruit and eats, and she gives some to her husband who was with her, and he also eats. And the eyes of both of them were opened. They knew that they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together, and they made themselves loincloths. Okay? So here's what happens. They're in the garden, they're in perfection, they're living life under the sun, and things are fine. But what's going to happen next is because of sin, their relationship with God is fragmented and broken, and now everything starts falling apart. Like their relationship with God falls apart, and everything falls apart. Like pretty soon God comes to Adam and says, hey, Adam, what are you doing? What's going on? And Adam says, I'm hiding because I'm naked. And he says, well, what happened? He says, well, I ate the fruit you told me not to eat. And God says, why? And he says, the woman that you gave me. Now, right? Like it's the woman, right? And so God goes to the woman and says, hey, what happened? She says, Satan made me do it. All right, this talking snake came, told me to do it. And there's this, joke that says, the man blamed the woman blamed the snake, and the snake didn't have any legs to stand on. You know what I'm saying? Like that's basically Genesis 3. Everyone's trying to find someone to blame. And what happens is our relationships are broken now. This is why marriage is difficult. This is why we fight. This is why we don't understand each other. Our otherness used to be a sense of completion, and now it's fragmentation and brokenness, right? It's not just each other that we're frustrated, even ourselves. James 1 says we are double-souled. In other words, we're broken internally. Like the purpose God gave us, we don't even fulfill easily. Like God told the man to fill the earth and cultivate it and make it beautiful, and now thorns and thistles come up from the ground, and that is why Monday mornings stink, all right? Because work is hard and it works against you. That's why you say, man, I just worked on this field and yet it's a mess still. That's why you say, man, I just worked on that account and yet now the account is still all tattered and messed up. Why doesn't work fulfill you the way that you want, no matter how hard you put into it? It's because life is broken now. See? It's broken. And you were meant to do that, and yet it's difficult. The Bible says when you have children, it's going to be a painful experience now. Childbearing is difficult for the woman because of the sin of Eve. See? And even our very world that we live in is broken. We have thorns and thistles coming up from the ground, which means that's why we have natural disasters. We have tornadoes. We have earthquakes. We have, tsunamis. We have crazy amounts of brokenness in this very earth, and that all stems from Genesis chapter 3. Romans 8 says, the world has been subjected to futility. And one day God's going to redeem the world. That's coming. One day God's going to make everything beautiful and good again. But until then, it says the world is experiencing labor pains. The world is in labor pains. So you guys know, if you've ever had a baby, you know what labor pains are like, right? It says the world is groaning with this deep pain of living in a broken state, right? So like when my wife had Olive, she didn't get the shot. She doesn't like needles, so she did it all natural. I don't know why. All right, I tried to convince her. But when she was having those labor pains, it was scary for me, okay? I'm not going to lie. At one point, she was groaning so deep, the nurse just kept talking. Like the nurse was talking about Grey's Anatomy or something. I don't even know what she was talking about. And my wife just looked at me and went, ugh. All right? I don't know what that meant, right? But thank God that her sister knew what that meant. Her sister looked at the nurse and said, you need to find someone else. You can't be doing this. And so they got a new nurse to come in because her pain was that deep. And then she groaned. I just sat down, right? I'm out. I don't even know what to do. She groaned again like that when another labor pain came. And my mother-in-law got up to help her. Honey, remember your breathing. Remember the way we practice. Tried to console her in her pain. And then I grabbed her mom. I said, hey, Don't do that. She's in pain. I said, hey, man, they just kicked out a nurse, and she's a professional. Okay? You want to be here for this? Sit down. You know what I'm saying? Because there's no way to get beyond that pain. That's what the world feels like right now. Pain. Brokenness. Genesis 6:17, when God floods the whole earth, animals and humans included, when he judges the world, he says, I'm going to judge everything with breath under the sun. So in other words, living under the sun is living under the judgment and curse of God, where everything you experience is broken. Everything that you come into contact with is broken. Everyone that you will ever meet is broken. That's life under the sun. That's life in a world that has been condemned and judged by God because it rejected God and pushed him out. When I was 10 years old, I went to the dentist, and the dentist gave me a shot. And then he gave me a shot on my right side, and he came and worked on me, and he worked on my left side. And I was in pain, tears coming down. I said, stop. And he said, what's wrong? I gave you the numbing. And I said, no, you worked on the other side. My bad, right? But you know what? Ecclesiastes says, hey, I'm going to drill, but I'm not going to give you anesthesia. And we're going to get in there because I want you to feel the weight of the bad news. Why would we do this, Pastor Joe? Why would you spend 8 weeks navigating the brokenness that Ecclesiastes invites? Here's why. You will never feel the weight. If you don't feel the weight of the bad news, you will never be able to experience the freedom of the good news. The bad news has to be real and in your bones until you could praise Jesus like a broken sinner. To use a phrase from my wife's Good Friday poem, the gospel gives permission for sinners to sing. See? It invites us into this chorus, but you cannot experience that freedom till you see how desperate and hopeless and vain your life is apart from him. So Ecclesiastes is a drill to expose the pain. Why? Because Jesus, who was not under the sun, but above in heaven, entered in to live under the sun, to take on our brokenness, to go to a cross, to experience the death that he did not create, to experience Hevel. Jesus takes on the Hebel face to face and experiences it. And on the cross, as he hangs there, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you let me experience the Hebel of this earth without any anesthesia, no shelter, no numbing? Face to face, God deals with the broken pain of this world in the person of Jesus Christ. And that's good news. That's good news. And we won't feel the weight of that until we're willing to admit and willing to go there to some of the dark, messy, broken places. And if you want to live your life apart from this wisdom, you're just chasing the wind.
Thanks again for joining us. And if you have any questions about today's recording, Gateway Church, or what it means to follow Jesus Christ, you can reach us through the contact section of our website, gwbrawley.org.